Hello from the floor. Today's topic is ADHD. I want to share what I think about it as a condition, given it's become so popularized and there's so much social media and attention on it in what I see on all sorts of platforms. And there's also criticism or a sense that it's possibly overdiagnosed. There's a lot around kids in schools and how that can really not be a need or the problems of teaching kids that have those extra needs and sensitivities. That also then translates to the workplace. And I'll be talking about the emotional regulation component of it, drawing heavily on Professor Russell Barkley's work. He, to my knowledge, is the most reputable researcher. He was studying it decades before it became even known by most people as a condition. He's in his 70s. He's very active still in critiquing a lot of the work that's going on at the moment. And the issue of emotional regulation is a really interesting one because I work a lot with burnout on how to really leverage the power of emotion and how to understand emotions and emotional regulation and emotional intelligence and how those things all fit together. And what I find is that people with these sensitivities, when I say these sensitivities, anyone that relates to the types of symptoms I'm talking about, is that the levels of impairment are incredibly severe. And while it's true that it is maybe overdiagnosed in some people, the devil's in the detail. There's a lot of people that possibly may be very affected by it and not know it. The attention on women in their 40s, and I'm right in that age group, getting diagnosed later in life is also linked to women's ability to mask and hide the symptoms. And I know in my experience at school, I was very, very diligent and conscientious. So I was always distracted. It was always that thing in the report card that if Kate applied herself, imagine what she could do. But I still got good enough marks to not present as someone having issues with learning. Marijuana addiction, which I later found out is one of the things that actually temporarily or can make ADHD symptoms more manageable. I didn't really know that. I just thought that I was smoking pot. But that's my first degree at uni. I used to smoke and concentrate really well. And all this stuff comes out over the years, right? So with emotional regulation, the way I think about it is a sensitivity and a lack of a gap between stimulus and response. So when a strong emotion comes up, most people, non-ADHD people, can sort of suppress that stimulation, can turn that off. They can choose not to pay attention to it. They can just temporarily, just unconsciously filter it out. Someone with ADHD can't do that. They feel like the stimulus or the stress or the emotion just becomes like a massive interruption they have to attend to. There's no sense of choice. It's always annoyed me when people labour the point that we have choice, because neurologically it doesn't work like that. So those deficits in the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate, basal ganglia. Anyway, I'm not going to try and sound really smart with those. I think there's 4 or 5 brain regions, and they govern things like our choice about what to pay attention to, our sense of time, our sense of being able to reason emotionally, being able to notice emotions as one factor, not the full factor of all reason. And there's probably a couple of other things there too. So those functions and those networks are impaired. So anything that invokes a strong emotion or a interruption in the sensory motor world is a huge encroachment into our attention. We can't soothe ourselves as easily, distract ourselves and get back to task if we're working on something. And then we can't create a chosen alternative to focus on. So an example might be, humans are apparently, compared to animals, we're the only species that can choose emotions. We can choose to fixate on something to create a different emotion. So that's harder when you have ADHD. So because of those things that I've just talked about in terms of the actual neurological function, the amount of energy that can be involved in managing small disruptions and emotions, and that's linked to rejection, what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and then to be able to reset or re-engage to move towards a goal, to be goal orientated and to string together behavior to meet the goal over time. That when you really look at that, you see that it's not overstated. I'm just still shocked when I look at it, and I still go, oh man, this is real. This is real. I really wish it wasn't real. I joke about it sometimes as a badge of, oh, I'm special. I'm neurospicy. But in my work environment, it's been the bane of my working life was for many years and still can be, though I have moved away from certain work environments because of this, is to be working on a lot of digital devices with a lot of complex knowledge coming at me. And the point with ADHD is you need to have more visual prompts around what you do. So working in open plan offices is just a nightmare because you've got so many other visual distractions. And it's you're kind of a weird person if you start setting up the prompts that would actually really work for you. You don't have to explain yourself, which adds just another layer of sort of inequity to the whole thing, to not being able to just work equally on par with other people and having to have this other element of explaining why you have to do things a certain way and why you can't do things the way that everyone else has set them up for you to do. So that working memory, the tools and the coaching around that is often to have visual prompts. So Post-its and coloured cards and schedules on big pieces of paper on a wall. If I turn this computer around, you'd see on mine. That stuff's so important and helpful because the technological dependency of some jobs is both unhealthy from the digital stimulation, all the stuff around digital detox and the fact that we sort of stare at screens and our posture changes and we're sitting at desks and all that disgusting stuff. But it's also, how do you locate the document between a series of 10 different tabs that are open? And then if you get logged out and you have to do authentications again, and then you get pop-ups and you get phone calls and you get emails that are constantly having to be resorted and reprioritized, and people set up their own operating systems that you then get invited to kind of try and work out how they've set things up. And that's ultimately why I don't work in those sort of government organisations anymore, because it's absolutely impossible. The adjustments can't be done within my risk tolerance. So that's the sort of lingo I use for helping people with workplace adjustments. Is there's a certain level of, yeah, okay, I'll work with that and work out something where we can all work together. But there's tipping points with people where if you look at the kind of stress they're under and the types of things that are causing stress, it's not just having 200 emails a day. It's not just the ridiculous office politics and the changing budgets and organisations and timeframes and goalposts. The ADD element, when you add to that, is a magnitude factor of at least 10 to 100. If I was to make up a measurement, which I'm prone to do. So the emotional regulation is misunderstood. So I want to call him Russell, but that's like I know him personally, right? Professor Barkley does have a lot of material on that sort of emotional regulation component, because if his content correctly here, it was taken out of the DSM manual, so the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, where disorders are made official by grand poobahs that call things real. It was taken out, and one of the reasons, or big reason, is there's this prevalence fear. So as soon as you put things in the manual, you're going to get more people with them, and then you're going to get risks around inflating the numbers, which we already have anyway, right? We already have that anyway. I don't know if we can really, sorry, my foot's fallen asleep. I don't know if we can really control for that anyway, you see. So, and I think the other reason might be with emotional regulation, it's such a common symptom across so many other disorders. So if you put things in that are too similar, if you put conditions in, it's already in anxiety, it's already in possibly things like the fear-based sort of pathologies. You can't have things just all saying the same thing and then saying that they're special and different. I don't know if I explained that very well, but I'm going to have to just let that go. And hopefully that was clear enough. The adjustments that we have to make, very much things that allow us to guide our own attention. I've been doing things like meditation for decades and, substantial amounts of meditation. My well-being and my health is really good for my age. And I've been through a process of going through all the things that it could be, ruling out anything that might be able to help, and still being left with these sort of cluster of symptoms, and then still being left with quite limited choices in my career about how I can work with people. It makes me really angry, makes me feel very disconnected from most of the world, and around those sort of conversations around ADD and medication. You're kind of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't with medication. Sometimes it's not the solution, particularly for certain things, but it does make some things easier, make some things harder. So I'm just going to move my head off screen for a second. I'm just looking at solutions, because when I was talking about how I've been watching ridiculous numbers of different people's interesting ADHD social media education videos and Insta reels and interesting little stories of how they present it in sort of relatable ways. They don't really have so much on the solutions or treatments. And I've already talked about making things visual, and the degree can be done really involves other people's support. Other people have to know that you're going to have things stuck all over the wall, or that when you talk to them, you might need to have a list next to you because you won't remember it. And if you end up with a pile of paper that you don't know what the hell's on that paper, you need a system for making sure you're triaging and putting that somewhere and actually working out the next step. Because carving out action steps in a linear way is not automatic. It's a prosthesis. It's like building an on-ramp in my brain. I have to set that out, and I have to know that when I do a task, I'm probably not going to remember the follow-up around it, and I'm going to need to set something up that reminds me, and I'm going to have a system that I repeatedly check and test and build. And other people in their innocence will come in and try and mess with that. And it's just knowing that that's the nature of the beast. Professor Barkley also talks about rehearsing what he calls when-then plans, because and that's also around the sequencing of actions. So the idea is that if you think ahead at the beginning of the day, what I'm going to be doing, and the actual connections between why I might write an article, chat GPT it, get an idea, write down some ideas, put it up to the side, move on to something else. But part of that for me is knowing that by the end of this week, that article will be published. So for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I will need to have a reminder on when I'm going to be doing the next edit or review or posting of that article. So every day it's like, what's already in play, what's got to happen today, and then how's that going to sequence over the next week? And that's a time frame that works for me. I'm just going to have to pause this for a second. Coming back after an interruption. The other part in the solutioning is being aware of when you're doing something, what the reason of doing it is. I've got someone beeping. This is such a live test of my life with ADHD. What do I do now, right? I'm going to have to pause again. Just had an interruption. The second solution I'm going to talk about, and I'll have to end it, is related to purpose. So I mentioned before an example about writing an article for my business, that when I'm really aware of the purpose of why I want to write that article and I get emotionally engaged in it, really why this topic's interesting to me, or why it can be a very mundane purpose. It can be something that will mean, so I get paid to do a certain thing. There's a reason for why I'm doing an action. And I amplify that sense of purpose, because I know that if anything else happens while I'm doing that, I can easily get distracted. But if I'm really committed to that sense of purpose, I'm much more able to communicate to whoever I need to what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and why I can't attend to them or be I can't remember the word, distracted right now. And that's an internal discipline. I would call that an internal discipline and a practice. I think that's why I used to also be really fixated, because the way before I knew what I know now, I would almost go into a tunnel where a bomb could go off and I wouldn't stop what I was doing. But it was just pure muscle tension and angst internally, which actually led to a whole bunch of health conditions. But it was that kind of idea that if I even let anybody in for a nanosecond, millisecond, that I would lose hours of work. So I put up all these walls to just go, no one can come in. That then made me present very negatively and poorly professionally, made me feel very misunderstood and very, I guess, a sense of sabotage, as if I was sabotaging my relationships at work because I couldn't express or organize to be able to have that go on in a professional context. And that just reminds me also of a common condition with ADHD, ADHD being a biological and neurological element, is the learning element, which is oppositional defiant disorder. So if you grow up with ADHD and you have a certain type of parenting which reinforces a lot of poor learning around authority, you're much more likely to get that oppositional element because you're having to fight people to be able to focus. That's a probably overgeneralized explanation, but that was definitely, I remember probably being on that edge of going, I could easily go into that oppositional defiant disorder kind of stuff where just completely exiting the system, any care of authority at all. And probably my North Shore, which is a Sydney reference, but my upbringing and my schooling was very, very good. So the quality of my schooling and the quality of my kind of physical environment was very good. So I think those things all also have a factor. So I'm going to have to leave it there, folks. I've got a friend visiting, but that's one part of ADHD. I'm really happy I've done that because I've got a few other parts of ADHD I want to talk about, but I really wanted to talk about the emotional regulation, the nature of, social media education, Professor Russell Barkley and why he's fantastic, and also the types of solutions that can work for people in work environments, in real environments where the rubber hits the road, where it's not just kind of laughing about being a ditz and distracted and all over the place and not able to do things properly. So, because it's a serious condition and I really think we can do so much better than what we do now. So see you next time from the floor. ADHD, there's so much social media now on it. It's quite overwhelming. I'm going to be talking about it. I'm going to add to the noise. I'm going to add my spin on it. And I'm talking both from personal experience and researching the topic as a psychologist and psychology researcher, and also in the context of workplaces and how ADHD, particularly the inattentive subtype, which is more common in adults on the whole. So the hyperactive subtype, there's two subtypes in the diagnostic manual. Hyperactive subtype is more associated with younger kids, so kids and children. It tends to get socialized out of us through the school system. The references I'll be talking to taken from Professor Russell Barkley, who, to my knowledge, is the most reputable authority. And he's in his 70s. He's still very active. He has his own YouTube channel and publishes weekly updates on ADHD research. I've also listened to a bunch of other practicing clinicians and researchers on the topic, as well as a whole bunch of YouTube coaches and all sorts of people and things. So in the interest of declaring why I know what I know, it's both from personal experience and from researching other people's direct experience. In terms of workplace adjustments, it's a very detailed exploration of my ADHD in workplaces and where I've come to. So I assume a little bit about it already. I don't have to explain much. I've already said, you'll see me face out and you go, oh, that's just because she's got ADHD. That's the typical image, isn't it? When people think about it, like someone that can't keep to the point, someone that starts things and can't finish them, someone who you talk to and you're not quite sure why they follow a certain logic in their brain and you don't know what the hell they're talking about. Somebody that just maybe has a lot of nervous energy and can't settle down and focus, somebody that's easily distracted. What Russell Barkley's been talking about in the videos I've been watching is the importance of emotional regulation, and that actually was a feature taken out of the DSM as a defining feature. So emotional regulation. It's also, and I'm just slowing myself down because it's a bit complex. I don't want to get all jargony, more than I have to, because the process of doing updates to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual number 5, which is an American-based standard for what's actually a pathology and a condition, and even Australian clinicians are bound by it. To be able to make a diagnosis, they need to be able to demonstrate meeting those criteria. And there's a bunch of different tests that can be used, and that's always evolving. Point being, it's made by a committee. So you can be an amazing researcher and send in what you think a condition is and why it's a condition and why it's not this other condition, because you don't want too many, every kind of symptom under the sun could potentially be a condition. But at the end of the day, you're getting these decisions made by a committee. And it happens everywhere in health policy, like Medicare, what's covered by Medicare, private health insurance. It's just like amazing, complex committees of people that you don't really know if they're really paying attention anymore to the impact of their decisions. That's another topic. The fear with mentioning emotional regulation is that it would increase the prevalence. So as soon as you put something into the manual, you're going to get more people having it. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And emotional regulation is a key part of emotional intelligence, and it's associated with executive function in the brain, which is the sort of metacognition impairment in ADHD. And that is both caused by a genetic component and a neurological component. And it is actually classified as a developmental condition. So our brains didn't develop and missed a few steps compared to adult non-ADHD people, which means that adjustments need to be like prosthesis, saying that right. They're add-ons. They're like having a fake arm or a leg, because you can't grow that arm or leg. If it's been amputated, you need to find some sort of substitute way of being able to complete tasks. The other part, no,